Hello, very beautiful community. The Trump-Epstein story and Trump's latest forced U-turn on the Epstein files matters. It matters because the shape of MAGA matters, what happens to the MAGA movement. And what happens to the MAGA movement matters because of the question of post-Trump MAGA. What will MAGA become after Trump is a very important question, because even if it'll no longer be reasonable to call whatever follows MAGA, MAGA 2.0, it might be a somewhat different movement. It's that political movement whose momentum will be the central threat to U.S. democracy in the 2030s. So, this really matters because we are, looking at the warm-up acts, which are going to be followed by the bigger challenge. There's a tendency to think this is the biggest challenge. It's not. This is the warm-up act. Trump is beginning to feel very troubled about being a lame duck president. That's one of the thoughts we have to keep in mind in these waters. And we do need to address the things that Bannon says about how Trump might go for a third term, allowing for the fact that Bannon is speaking invitationally more than explanatorily about this. But putting aside the real prospects of that and putting aside for a moment this absolutely huge question about how Trump reacts to the midterms. Is he going to say, it didn't happen, I didn't lose, the votes are fake? But putting all that aside, a large part of Trump's attachment to the notion of the third term being ventilated is that simply he doesn't want to be perceived as a lame duck president. And he is negotiating this latest chapter in the Epstein saga while being most worried above all about being perceived as a lame duck president, which is very, very dangerous. Not just because Trump isn't able to take advice generally and make responsible decisions, not just because Trump is impulsive, but because he's now going to have a strategic political reason to do what in the Yeltsin time in Russia was called a kind of zigzag. It's something you do that's dramatic, often a military exercise of a certain kind to distract from domestic politics. So it's very important to understand Trump's lame duck terror as we try to figure out how he is negotiating this. I think second thought I have is that Marjorie Taylor Green is very important to watch. She's a repulsive political entrepreneur who under ideal conditions would be nowhere near public life. But she's very good, and she's a very sophisticated entrepreneur, and it's worth watching her, because if she is changing her course, that is an indication of her team's perception of sort of the swishing, changing currents in the sensibility of the electorate on particular issues. So she is worth looking at just for that reason. Just for that reason alone, she's likely to be first on a lot of questions about public mood. Now, Trump has made it his political career for several years at least to make the case that the fallout from whatever the Epstein files are being released is going to affect the Dems more than him. Since then, he has been against the files being released. He's really not wanted them out. He's been forced, because it looked to him clear that he would lose, to change tack. And here we have two thoughts that we've got to keep in mind. One is the different ways in which Trump could have the materials redacted and doctored. The other is this notion that we're familiar with Russian propaganda of flooding the zone, and trying to benefit from a kind of flooding of the zone because a couple of really bad things come out about you, but 77 other things about different people come out, and it's a wash, which will then give the opportunity for Trump to make a post-truth argument that he's the only one in the story who is innocent. I think that, another point for the Democrats, it's hugely important to not make the Epstein story the central focus. Simply because the risk of that is that you're not articulating an alternative to Trump. And the risk of that in connection with the Epstein files is that, yes, they might be damaging to Trump and to other people, but their central impact is just, in fact, to accelerate loss of trust in elites, to accelerate loss of trust in politics in the way that's a wash. It's something that makes citizens think, oh, well, the whole damn thing is rotten to the core. So, the more Epstein there is in the news, the more loss of trust there is going to be in political conventions, political institutions. Funnily enough, that does not benefit the Democrats. So what you want is an understanding that you can't focus on that as the main stick you've got against Trump. You need a positive alternative, and you need to hit Trump very hard on where he is weakest, which is actually connecting with the genuine felt concerns of Americans economically, democratically, politically. And Trump is a master of reading the nation's unconscious only when it serves him. Often he's good at that when he runs. But he has a propensity to drift away from public sentiment when in office, and it's there the Democrats should try to hit him hard. And you've got to be careful about the notion that you can benefit in the end from using Epstein as a stick. That's your main stick. You can use it as a stick, but make sure it's not your main one. Enough for today. Just some thoughts as we're negotiating these political waters. Lots of love. Talk soon.